A mechanical system operates with absolute precision. Calculate the spring's tension and the gear ratios, and you know exactly how every component turns. Traditional management often tries to run an organization the same way, treating employees as fixed gears in a rigid hierarchy. That approach fails because human beings are highly situational. We constantly alter our behavior based on environmental cues, peer dynamics, and external stress. To solve that unpredictability, we rely on a specific analytical discipline, organizational behavior. This diagram illustrates what organizational behavior actually is. It is a rigorous interdisciplinary study that extracts principles from psychology and sociology and directly applies them to management structure to see how individuals and groups affect performance. The entire discipline is built on 3 core traits. It relies strictly on scientific research rather than intuition. It maintains a humanistic focus on people rather than physical assets, and it is entirely goal-oriented. In a corporate environment, this is the primary mechanism leaders use to diagnose communication breakdowns, manage internal conflicts, and build effective leadership pipelines. The discipline treats human interaction as a measurable science, identifying the specific variables that dictate how a human system performs. Mastering organizational behavior marks the difference between operating as a reactive manager and designing as a proactive systems architect. Before we can build a predictive behavioral model, we first need to isolate the raw variables. In an organization, these variables operate at 3 distinct scales. The analysis starts at the most atomic scale, the individual level. Here, we measure 4 highly specific variables that define a single employee. We chart their baseline personality, their daily attitude, their perception of the work environment, and their internal motivation. When individual nodes aggregate, we reach the second scale of complexity, the group level, introducing branches like communication, leadership, and team dynamics. Managing a group requires completely different techniques, as poor communication can make high performers destructive. Finally, we reach the largest macro scale, the organizational level, the structural boundary encasing all groups. The variables here dictate the physical structural hierarchy of the company, unwritten rules of internal culture, and strict protocols for change management. Because these 3 levels constantly interact, diagnosing a drop in productivity requires precise analytical isolation. Systemic organizational failure almost always occurs when management solves a macro, organizational level problem, like a toxic culture, with a micro, individual level intervention, like a motivational seminar. Once the raw variables are successfully isolated, we feed them into a central operational model to generate actionable data. This chart details the standard OB framework. It is a strictly linear mechanical sequence that moves with to right, from inputs, through processes, to outcomes. The inputs column represents the baseline starting conditions of the human system. This is what you have before any actual work begins. We map our initial variables here. We input the existing employee personality profiles, their core values, and the overarching organizational culture. Next, inputs move into processes, the active mechanisms of the organization and primary domain where management intervenes. Specifically, this column tracks how information moves through communication networks, the speed and accuracy of decision-making, and the direct actions taken by leadership. Finally, the sequence reaches outcomes, which represent the final, measurable results generated by the entire system. This phase demands a wider lens than just raw financial performance. It also requires the rigorous measurement of daily employee satisfaction and long-term organizational commitment. Mapping human behavior through this engine reveals that employee satisfaction functions as a measurable, systemic output of optimized processes. How leadership chooses to execute that processes phase will drastically alter the final outcomes. Historically, organizational behavior has categorized leadership ideology into 5 distinct models. The oldest paradigm is the autocratic model, relying entirely on raw positional power. The manager issues direct orders, and employees must strictly obey. While this ensures immediate basic compliance on the factory floor, it completely fails to generate any high-level psychological commitment from the modern workforce. To counter that friction, organizations developed the custodial model. This shifts the mechanism of control away from overt fear, replacing it with economic security. Providing high wages and robust job security creates organizational dependence. Employees stay, but dependence does not inherently drive high performance or innovation. The true shift toward humanistic management arrives with the supportive model. Here, the manager's role transitions from a dictator of discrete tasks to a facilitator. Their primary function is to support employee growth and remove operational roadblocks. This naturally progresses into the collegial model, highly common in modern startup cultures. It is built on a foundation of deep teamwork, where employees operate essentially as trusted partners rather than subordinates. Finally, we reach the most optimized evolution of organizational behavior, the system model. The system model abandons rigid control in favor of a high-trust, cooperative environment. By aligning the psychological goals of the employee with the structural goals of the company, it consistently maximizes the performance and commitment variables in the outcomes column. Crucially, because organizational behavior is situational, there is no single perfect model. An acute crisis may demand a brief return to autocratic control, while a complex R&D initiative requires a collegial approach. A manager's chosen operational model is never neutral. It acts as either the primary bottleneck or the ultimate accelerator for the entire organizational engine. Despite relying on rigorous mapping and strict frameworks, we must acknowledge the primary limitation of this discipline. Behavioral models are not 100% mechanically accurate. As we look back at our framework, we see that accuracy is constantly throttled by external noise. Flow lines are routinely disrupted by deeply ingrained cultural differences and the baseline unpredictability of human emotion. On a practical level, diagnosing individual motivations and re-engineering team dynamics is highly time-consuming compared to the speed of simply issuing an autocratic order. However, the yield on that time investment